Andre Jackson was the kind of boy who seemed to live in his own world. At 12 years old, he wasn't like the other kids at Pinewood Middle School. While most boys his age raced to the basketball courts during lunch break or huddled together trading card games and jokes, Andre could usually be found sitting alone under the big oak tree with his nose buried in a book. It wasn't that Andre didn't want friends. He just found it hard to connect with kids who didn't share his interests. He loved reading about space, history, and classical composers, things that made the other kids roll their eyes or laugh behind his back. "Hey, book boy. Too scared to play ball with the real boys?" The taunts had become so common that Andre barely looked up anymore. He'd learned that responding only made things worse. Andre's home life wasn't easy either. He lived with his mom and grandmother in a small apartment on the east side of town. His mom worked 2 jobs, days at the hospital cafeteria and evenings cleaning offices downtown. His grandmother, who everyone called Nana Bia, looked after him when his mom was working. Money was always tight, but they made do. "You just keep your head in those books," Nana Bia would tell him. "Your brain will take you places your feet never could." At school, Andre was a quiet student who rarely raised his hand, even when he knew the answers. Some teachers took his silence for disinterest or lack of intelligence. Others saw something different, a thoughtful boy who absorbed everything around him like a sponge. Mr. Harris was not one of those teachers. As the music teacher at Pinewood, Mr. Harris had been teaching there for nearly 30 years. He was set in his ways and had clear ideas about which students would succeed in music and which wouldn't. In his mind, the athletic boys were good for percussion, the outgoing girls for choir, and the nerdy types for band instruments. Andre didn't fit neatly into any of those boxes, and that bothered Mr. Harris. One Tuesday morning in October, the principal made an announcement over the loudspeaker that would change everything. "Attention students and faculty. I'm pleased to announce that thanks to a generous donation from the Pinewood Arts Foundation, our music department will be launching a string instrument program next month. All 6th and 7th graders will have the opportunity to learn violin, viola, or cello as part of their regular music class." The classroom erupted with groans and whispers. "Quiet down, Mr. Patterson," Andre's homeroom teacher said sharply. "This is a wonderful opportunity." After the announcement, several teachers gathered in the staff lounge during their planning period. "Just what I need," Mr. Harris complained, stirring his coffee aggressively. "A bunch of kids scratching away at violins when they can barely sit still for 5 minutes. "Come on, Tom," said Ms. Wright, the science teacher. "Some kids might really take to it," Mr. Harris snorted. "Yeah, right. Can you imagine some of these kids playing Beethoven? Half of them can't even be bothered to tie their shoes properly." Mr. Patterson, who had been listening silently, suddenly spoke up. "You know who would be hilarious on violin? That Jackson kid in my homeroom. The quiet one who never looks anyone in the eye?" asked Mrs. Bennett, the math teacher. "That's him," Mr. Patterson nodded. "Always has his head in the clouds or in some book. Doesn't say 2 words in class." Mr. Harris chuckled. "Oh, that would be something. Kid can barely speak up in class and you want him to perform on a violin?" The conversation shifted, becoming something uglier. "You know, it might actually be good for him," Mr. Patterson said, a strange glint in his eye. Maybe being forced to stand up and play in front of everyone would finally break him out of his shell. Mrs. Bennett looked uncomfortable. "I don't know, Mike, that sounds a bit what?" Mr. Patterson challenged. "The kid needs to toughen up. World's not going to coddle him forever." Mr. Harris was warming to the idea. "You know what? Patterson's right. Let's put him on violin, not cello. That's too easy to make sound decent. Violin shows every mistake, every squeak and scratch. Are you seriously suggesting we set a student up to fail?" Ms. Wright asked, frowning. "Not fail," Mr. Harris said smoothly. "Just learn a valuable life lesson. Sometimes you have to face your fears. And sometimes you need to learn your place," Mr. Patterson muttered, low enough that only Mr. Harris heard him clearly. Ms. Wright gathered her papers. "I want no part of this," she said, heading for the door. "And I hope you both reconsider." But they didn't reconsider. Instead, when the instrument assignments were handed out the following week, Andre found himself assigned to violin, while most of his classmates got their choices of cello or viola. The day the instruments were distributed, Mr. Harris made a show of handing Andre his violin case. "Jackson, you'll be taking first violin," he announced loudly. "That means you'll be front and center at the winter concert in December." Andre's stomach dropped. Front and center? In front of the whole school? He clutched the case to his chest, too nervous to even open it in class. That afternoon, Andre walked home slowly, the violin case feeling heavier with each step. He wasn't sure how to tell his mom about this new development. Money was already tight, and even though the school provided the instruments, he knew there would be other costs, music books, maybe even private lessons if he was really going to play in front of everyone. When he opened the apartment door, Nana Bia was in the kitchen making dinner. "What's that you're carrying, child?" she asked, looking over her glasses at the strange black case. "A violin," Andre mumbled. "They're making us learn at school." Nana B wiped her hands on her apron and came closer. "Let me see that." She reached for the case, her eyes suddenly bright with interest. Andre set it on the kitchen table and unlatched it carefully. Inside, nestled in dark blue velvet, was a honey-colored violin with a matching bow. Nana B gasped softly. "Well, I never—" She reached out a wrinkled hand and touched the wood gently, almost reverently. "Do you know your grandfather played the violin?" Andre looked up in surprise. "Grandpa Joe, really?" "Oh, yes." Nana B nodded, her eyes growing distant with memory. "He was quite good, too. Played in church and at community dances. He even had a little jazz group for a while before he got sick." Andre had never known this about his grandfather, who had died before he was born. He looked at the violin with new interest. "Can I hear what it sounds like?" Nana Bea asked. Andre hesitated. "I don't know how to play it yet." "Just try," she encouraged. "Pick it up like you think you should." Awkwardly, Andre lifted the violin and tucked it under his chin the way he'd seen people do on TV. He picked up the bow and drew it across the strings, producing a harsh scratching sound that made them both wince. "Sorry," he said, quickly putting it back in the case. Nana B chuckled. "Don't be sorry. Nobody plays perfectly the first time. Your grandpa used to say a violin has to get to know you before it sings for you." When Andre's mom came home that night, exhausted from her shift at the hospital, Nana Bia had already filled her in about the violin. "I'm not sure I can afford lessons," his mom said worriedly, looking at the instrument on the table. "He doesn't need paid lessons," Nana B said firmly. "Not yet anyway. I have an idea." The next day after school, instead of taking Andre home, Nana Bea led him to a small house a few blocks from their apartment. The yard was neat but simple, with a few rose bushes lining the walkway. "Where are we going?" Andre asked. "To see an old friend," Nana Bea replied mysteriously. She knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it opened to reveal an elderly black man with silver hair and warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Beatrice Jackson," the man said with a smile. "It's been too long." "Dr. Wilson," Nana B replied. "I've brought someone I'd like you to meet. This is my grandson, Andre." Dr. Wilson invited them in, and Andre was immediately struck by the music that seemed to fill every corner of the small house. There were records and CDs stacked neatly on shelves, framed concert programs on the walls and in the corner of the living room, a beautiful old violin on a stand. "Dr. Wilson used to play with your grandpa," Nana Bea explained to Andre. "He also taught music at the university for 40 years. Retired now," Dr. Wilson said, easing himself into an armchair. "But I still keep my fingers nimble." He nodded toward the violin in the corner. "Now, Beatrice tells me you've been given a violin at school?" Andre nodded, suddenly shy. "And your teacher," Dr. Wilson continued, his eyes twinkling knowingly. "He expects you to fail, doesn't he?" Andre's head shot up in surprise. "How did this man know?" Dr. Wilson chuckled. "I've been around long enough to know how some people think." "May I see your violin?" Andre opened the case he'd brought with him. Dr. Wilson examined it carefully, testing the strings and inspecting the bow. "School instrument," he muttered. "Not bad, actually. With proper care, it'll serve you well enough to start." He looked directly at Andre. "The question is, do you want to learn? Really learn, not just enough to get by in class?" Andre thought about Mr. Harris and Mr. Patterson, about their smirking faces when they handed him the violin. Something stirred inside him, a feeling he wasn't used to. Pride, maybe, or defiance. "Yes," he said, his voice stronger than usual. "I want to learn." Dr. Wilson smiled, a slow, satisfied smile. "Good. Then we begin today." That first lesson with Dr. Wilson lasted nearly 2 hours, though to Andre it felt like minutes. They started with the absolute basics, How to hold the violin properly, how to stand, how to care for the instrument. A violin is like a living thing, Dr. Wilson explained as he showed Andre how to tighten and rosin the bow. Treat it with respect and it will sing for you. Neglect it and it will scream in protest. Andre nodded, taking in every word. He'd never seen someone handle an object with such care and reverence. Now, Dr. Wilson said, once Andre had the violin tucked correctly under his chin, we begin with open strings. Don't worry about your left hand yet. Just feel the bow on the strings. The first sounds Andre produced were harsh and scratchy, nothing like the beautiful tones Dr. Wilson had demonstrated. His face burned with embarrassment. That's exactly right, Dr. Wilson said, surprising him. But it sounds terrible, Andre protested. Of course it does, Dr. Wilson laughed. Everyone sounds terrible at first. The question is whether you have the patience to sound terrible for as long as it takes to begin sounding good. When it was time to leave, Dr. Wilson handed Andre a thin book of beginner exercises. Practice these every day. 30 minutes, no more. Quality over quantity. And come back on Thursday. As they walked home, Andre clutched his violin case tightly. Do you think I can really learn to play it, Nana? Nana Bea squeezed his shoulder. Dr. Wilson wouldn't waste his time if he didn't think so. And I've never known him to be wrong about musical talent. That night, Andre practiced in his bedroom with the door closed. The apartment was small, and he was conscious of the scratchy sounds echoing through the thin walls. Still, he followed Dr. Wilson's instructions precisely, playing each open string 20 times, focusing on making clean, even sounds. His mother came home just as he was finishing. What in the world? She said, poking her head into his room. Is that you making that racket? Andre lowered the violin. Sorry, Mom, I was practicing. To his surprise, she smiled. Don't apologize. Your Nana told me about Dr. Wilson. I think it's wonderful. She looked tired, but her eyes were warm. Your grandpa would be proud. The next day at school, Mr. Harris had the students bring their instruments to music class for the first time. All right, everyone, he announced. Let's see what we're working with. Who wants to demonstrate what they've learned so far? A few hands went up, mostly kids who'd had some previous musical experience. Mr. Harris ignored them, his eyes landing on Andre instead. Jackson, he said with a barely concealed smirk, why don't you show us what you've learned? Andre felt his heart pounding. He hadn't expected to play in front of everyone so soon. Slowly, he opened his case and lifted out his violin, aware of all eyes on him. Sometime today, Jackson, Mr. Harris said, prompting laughter from some students. Taking a deep breath, Andre remembered Dr. Wilson's words. He stood tall, positioned the violin carefully under his chin and drew the bow across the open G string, just as he'd practiced. The note wasn't perfect, but it was clear and steady. Mr. Harris's eyebrows rose slightly. He'd clearly expected worse. Play all 4 strings, he instructed. Andre did so, moving from G to D to A to E, producing a reasonably even sound on each. The room was quiet now, the earlier laughter gone. Well, Mr. Harris said, looking slightly disappointed, at least you've learned which end is which. Let's see how you do with actual notes next week. After class, a boy named Dion approached Andre in the hallway. Hey, he said, that wasn't bad. How'd you learn to hold it like that already? Andre hesitated, unsure if this was some kind of trick. My Nana's friend is teaching me, he finally said. He used to be a music professor. For real? Dion looked impressed. My mom just showed me some videos on YouTube. She says we can't afford lessons. Maybe. Andre started, then paused. Was he really about to suggest this? Maybe you could come with me sometime. To my lessons, I mean. Dr. Wilson might not mind. Dion's face lit up. That would be awesome. I got stuck with the viola and I have no idea what I'm doing. For the first time in years, Andre walked home with someone who might actually become a friend. Thursday's lesson with Dr. Wilson went even better than the first. The elderly teacher seemed pleased with Andre's progress on the open strings. You've been practicing, he noted. Good. Now we'll add the left hand. By the end of the hour, Andre could play a simple 5-note scale, his fingers awkwardly finding their places on the fingerboard. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Dr. Wilson, Andre said as he was packing up his violin. I met someone at school who's learning viola. Would it be okay if he came with me sometime? Dr. Wilson considered this. What's his name? Dion. He doesn't have a teacher and his mom can't afford lessons. A slow smile spread across Dr. Wilson's face. You know, I taught strings to young people for over 4 decades. I've missed having more than one student at a time. Bring your friend next Tuesday. On the way out, Andre noticed a photograph on the wall he hadn't seen before. It showed a much younger Dr. Wilson standing with a group of black men in suits all holding instruments. Is that you? Andre asked, pointing at the picture. Indeed it is, Dr. Wilson nodded. The River City String Quartet circa 1967. Your grandfather took that photo, actually. He played with us sometimes, though he wasn't part of the regular group. Andre stared at the image, trying to imagine these young men playing together all those years ago. Were you famous? Dr. Wilson chuckled. Famous? No, not at all. But we were good. We played weddings, community events, church functions, even a few clubs in the city. His expression grew more serious. It wasn't easy for black classical musicians back then. Still isn't in many ways. What do you mean? Andre asked. Dr. Wilson was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. There's always been this idea about who belongs in certain spaces, who gets to play certain kinds of music. He tapped the photograph gently. We had to be twice as good just to get half the respect. Andre thought about Mr. Harris and his clear surprise when Andre had played the open strings correctly. I think I understand. Dr. Wilson's eyes were kind but searching. I think perhaps you do. Now practice your scales before Tuesday, and bring your friend. The following Monday, Andre's class had music again. This time Mr. Harris had them all play simple one-note exercises, moving around the room to check each student's progress. When he got to Andre, his expression was skeptical. Let's hear your A scale, Jackson. Andre played the 5 notes he'd learned with Dr. Wilson. They weren't perfect, but they were recognizable. Mr. Harris frowned. Who's been helping you? My grandfather's friend, Andre said. He used to teach music at the university. This information seemed to annoy Mr. Harris rather than impress him. Well, don't get ahead of the class. Everyone needs to learn the same things at the same pace. After school, Andre asked his mother if Dayan could come over to practice before their lesson with Dr. Wilson the next day. Of course, she said, sounding pleased. It's about time you brought a friend home. The boys spent an hour in Andre's room comparing notes on what they'd learned so far. Dayan was struggling more with his viola, and Andre found himself repeating Dr. Wilson's advice about how to hold the instrument and bow. Man, your teacher sounds cool, Dayan said. My mom tried to help, but she doesn't know anything about string instruments either. The next day, both boys went to Dr. Wilson's house after school. The elderly musician welcomed Dayan warmly and spent the first part of the lesson assessing what he knew. You have good instincts, Dr. Wilson told him, but your bow hold needs work. Like this. He demonstrated, then helped Dayan adjust his grip. For the rest of the hour, Dr. Wilson taught them a simple duet. Just open strings and first position notes, but when played together, it actually sounded like music. By December, Dr. Wilson said as they packed up, you'll both be playing real pieces, not just exercises. On the walk home, Dayan couldn't stop talking about the lesson. That was amazing. Do you think he'd let me come again? I'm sure he would, Andre said. He seemed happy to have both of us. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Andre practiced daily at home, had regular lessons with Dr. Wilson, now always with Dayan, and endured Mr. Harris's increasingly thin-lipped evaluations at school. It became clear that Mr. Harris was annoyed by Andre's progress. He'd expected the boy to struggle, to be embarrassed, perhaps even to quit. Instead, Andre was advancing faster than most of the class. One day in early November, Mr. Harris kept Andre after class. Jackson, he said, his voice carefully neutral. The winter concert is coming up next month. Andre nodded, feeling a flutter of anxiety. He'd been trying not to think about performing in front of the whole school. I've decided to have you play a short solo, Mr. Harris continued. Something to showcase what you've learned. Andre's mouth went dry. A solo? Yes, Mr. Harris said, a glint in his eye that made Andre uneasy. Something challenging. Vivaldi, I think. Winter from the Four Seasons. Just the first movement, of course. Andre had heard Dr. Wilson play parts of the Four Seasons. It was far beyond his current abilities, but sir, he protested, I don't think I'm ready for something like that. Nonsense, Mr. Harris said dismissively. Your private teacher has been pushing you ahead of the class, hasn't he? This is your chance to show everyone what you can do. He handed Andre a folder of sheet music. You have 5 weeks. I'm sure that's plenty of time for someone getting special lessons. As Andre left the classroom, the reality of what had just happened sank in. Mr. Harris wasn't trying to help him shine. He was setting him up to fail spectacularly, in front of everyone. With shaking hands, Andre opened the folder and looked at the music. The page was a maze of notes, far more complex than anything he'd attempted so far. How was he supposed to learn this in just 5 weeks? That afternoon, he showed the music to Dr. Wilson. The elderly musician studied the pages, his expression growing increasingly grave. This is a very difficult piece, he said finally, far beyond what any beginner should be attempting. Mr. Harris says I have to play it at the winter concert, Andre said, his voice small. In front of everyone, Dr. Wilson set the music aside and looked at Andre intently. Your teacher, he said carefully, is not being fair to you. This piece would challenge even advanced students. So I can't do it? Andre felt both disappointed and relieved. Dr. Wilson was quiet for a long moment. I didn't say that, he finally replied. I said it would be challenging. A slow smile spread across his face. And I've never been one to back down from a challenge. Have you? The Vivaldi piece sat on Andre's music stand like a mountain waiting to be climbed. Each time he looked at it, his stomach tightened with anxiety. How could he possibly learn this in just 5 weeks? We'll break it down, Dr. Wilson said, sitting beside Andre at their next lesson. Note by note, measure by measure. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was a violinist. Dion watched from the corner, his own viola temporarily forgotten. Maybe you could play something easier instead. He suggested. Dr. Wilson shook his head. That would be letting them win. Oh, we'll tackle this head on. He looked at Andre with serious eyes. But I won't lie to you. This will be the hardest thing you've ever done. You'll need to practice every day, not just 30 minutes, but 2 or 3 hours. Andre thought about his small apartment, about his mom working late, about his homework and chores. I don't know if I can find that much time. You can practice here, Dr. Wilson offered. Come straight from school. I'll speak with your grandmother. And so began the most intense month of Andre's young life. Every day after school, he went directly to Dr. Wilson's house. The elderly teacher broke down the Vivaldi piece into tiny sections, sometimes focusing on just 4 or 5 notes for an entire session. Again, Dr. Wilson would say, after Andre had played the same measure 10 times, listen to the pitch. Is your third finger high enough? Andre's fingertips grew calloused. His left shoulder ached from holding the violin. Sometimes, late in the evening when he was trying to finish homework, he would fall asleep at the kitchen table, too exhausted to make it to bed. His mother worried. This is too much, she told Nana B one night when she thought Andre couldn't hear. He's just a child. He shouldn't be working this hard. He's finding his passion, Nana B replied. Dr. Wilson says he has real talent. But what if he fails? What if after all this work he gets up on that stage and can't play the piece? You know how cruel kids can be. There was a long pause before Nana Bia answered. Then he'll learn that failure isn't the end of the world. But I don't think he's going to fail. At school, Mr. Harris frequently asked about Andre's progress with the Vivaldi. Coming along, Jackson? He would say with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Remember, the concert is just a few weeks away. Sometimes he would ask Andre to demonstrate a difficult passage in front of the class, knowing full well it was beyond his current abilities. Andre would try his best, but the results were often squeaky and hesitant, prompting snickers from some classmates. Dayon always defended him. At least he's trying something hard, he'd say loudly. The rest of us are still playing Mary Had a Little Lamb. This usually earned Dion a stern look from Mr. Harris, but it made Andre feel less alone. 3 weeks before the concert, disaster struck. Andre arrived at Dr. Wilson's house for his usual practice session, to find the elderly man coughing severely. A handkerchief pressed to his mouth. Just a cold, Dr. Wilson insisted, though his voice was weak and his normally straight posture was hunched. We'll keep it short today. But by the end of the lesson, Dr. Wilson could barely speak through his coughing, and his hands trembled as he demonstrated a difficult fingering. The next day, Dr. Wilson's neighbor called Nana B. Dr. Wilson had been taken to the hospital with pneumonia. He's going to be fine, Nana B assured Andre when she told him the news. But he won't be teaching for a while, at least a couple of weeks. Andre felt the floor drop out from under him. 2 weeks? The concert was in less than 3. Without Dr. Wilson, how would he ever master the rest of the piece? That evening, Andre sat in his room, staring at the Vivaldi sheet music. He'd learned maybe half of the first movement properly. The rest was still a jumble of notes he could barely read, let alone play. I can't do it, he whispered to himself. I should just tell Mr. Harris I can't play the solo. There was a soft knock at his door. His mother entered, still wearing her hospital cafeteria uniform. Nana told me about Dr. Wilson, she said, sitting on the edge of his bed. I'm sorry, baby. Andre tried to hold back tears but couldn't. I'm going to fail, he choked out. Everyone will laugh at me. His mother pulled him close, letting him cry against her shoulder. When his tears subsided, she held him at arm's length and looked him in the eye. Listen to me, she said firmly. You don't have to do this. If it's too much, you can tell your teacher you need something easier. There's no shame in that. Andre wiped his eyes. But Dr. Wilson said, Dr. Wilson isn't the one who has to get up on that stage, she interrupted. You are, and it's your choice. Andre was quiet for a long moment. If I don't play it, he finally said, Mr. Harris wins. He wanted me to fail from the beginning. His mother sighed. Is that what this is about? Proving your teacher wrong? Not just that, Andre said slowly, thinking it through. It's about proving something to myself, too. I've never worked this hard at anything before. I want to see if I can do it. His mother studied his face, then nodded. All right. If that's what you want, we'll find a way. Maybe Dr. Wilson can recommend another teacher temporarily. But Dr. Wilson was too ill to take calls. His neighbor said he was improving but needed complete rest. The next day at school, Andre told Dion the situation. Man, that's rough. Dion sympathized during lunch. What are you going to do? Keep practicing, I guess, Andre said, though his confidence was fading. I just don't know if I'm doing it right without Dr. Wilson to correct me. Dion was thoughtful for a moment. You know, my cousin goes to Westridge High. They have this amazing orchestra teacher, Ms. Powell. Maybe she could help? Would she teach someone who's not her student? We could ask. She lives in my building, actually, 4th floor. That afternoon, instead of going to Dr. Wilson's empty house, Andre and Dayon climbed the stairs to the 4th floor of Dayon's apartment building. Ms. Powell turned out to be a young woman with bright eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Vivaldi's Winter? She exclaimed when Andre explained the situation. For a beginner? Your teacher must be... She caught herself. Well, that's certainly ambitious. Dr. Wilson was helping me, Andre said. But he's sick now. Ms. Powell's expression softened. Robert Wilson? From the university? Andre nodded. He was a legend in the music department, she said with newfound respect. If he thought you could handle Vivaldi, then maybe you can. She glanced at her watch. I have 30 minutes before my next student. Let's see what you've got. For the next half hour, Ms. Powell listened to Andre play what he'd learned so far. She made a few corrections, but seemed genuinely impressed. You've only been playing for 2 months? She asked incredulously. That's remarkable progress. Andre felt a flush of pride at her words. I can give you 2 lessons a week until the concert, Ms. Powell offered. It won't be enough to perfect the piece, but it might be enough to make it presentable. Between Ms. Powell's lessons and his own daily practice, Andre continued to improve. The notes that had once seemed impossible became merely difficult and then, gradually achievable. His left-hand fingers began to find their positions automatically, and his bow arm gained strength and control. 2 days before the concert, Andre received wonderful news. Dr. Wilson had been released from the hospital. Though still weak, he insisted on hearing Andre play. Nana Bia took Andre to Dr. Wilson's house, where the elderly musician sat in an armchair, looking thinner but with the same sharp eyes. Let's hear it, young man, he said without preamble. The whole movement. Andre had never played the entire piece from beginning to end without stopping. Even with Ms. Powell, they had always worked on it in sections. But he stood tall, positioned his violin, and began to play. The opening notes were crisp and clear. As he moved into the more difficult passages, he made mistakes. A few wrong notes, some shaky intonation. But he kept going. When he reached the fast 16th note runs that had once seemed impossible, his fingers flew over the fingerboard with surprising accuracy. When he finished, the room was silent. Andre lowered his violin, breathing hard, afraid to look at Dr. Wilson's face. Well, Dr. Wilson finally said, his voice rough with emotion, it seems I missed quite a bit of progress while I was away. Andre looked up to see the elderly teacher smiling broadly. "It's not perfect," Andre admitted. "Of course it's not perfect," Dr. Wilson agreed. "You've been playing for all of 2 months. But it's musical, Andre. You're not just playing notes, you're making music." The day of the concert arrived. Andre's stomach was in knots as he took his seat with the other string students in the school auditorium. His violin felt slippery in his sweaty hands. Mr. Harris was moving around nervously, arranging music stands and giving last-minute instructions. When he came to Andre, his smile was tight. "Ready for your big moment, Jackson?" Andre nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The auditorium filled with parents, teachers, and students. Andre spotted his mother and Nana B in the third row. To his surprise, Dr. Wilson was with them, looking frail but determined. Ms. Powell had managed to come too, sitting near the back. Dayon, who would perform with the viola section later, gave him a thumbs up from the wings. The concert began with the full orchestra playing simple pieces they'd learned in class. Then Mr. Harris stepped to the microphone. "For our next selection," he announced, "we have a special solo performance. Andre Jackson will play the first movement of Vivaldi's Winter from the Four Seasons." There was polite applause as Andre walked to the center of the stage. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him. His heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He looked out at the audience, at his mother's worried face, at Nana B's encouraging smile, at Dr. Wilson watching intently. Then he raised his violin, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes rang out clear and true in the silent auditorium. Andre forced himself to focus only on the music, to forget about the audience, about Mr. Harris, about everything except the violin in his hands and the melody flowing from it. He wasn't perfect. There were missed notes and scratchy passages. Once his bow slipped and produced an ugly screech that made him wince, but he kept going just as Dr. Wilson had taught him. And as he played, something strange happened. The nerves faded away. The audience disappeared. There was only the music, powerful, emotional, alive. When he reached the difficult runs near the end, his fingers seemed to move on their own, finding the notes with a precision that surprised even him. And then suddenly he was playing the final chords, drawing out the last note until it faded into silence. For a moment, the auditorium remained absolutely quiet. Andre lowered his violin, his heart still racing, unsure what the silence meant. Then from the back of the room, someone began to clap. Others joined in, the applause growing louder and stronger until the entire audience was on its feet. Andre looked at Mr. Harris, whose face had gone pale with shock. Their eyes met briefly before the music teacher quickly looked away. As the applause continued, Andre felt a smile spread across his face. He had done it. Against all odds, he had done it, and in that moment, with the audience cheering and his violin warm in his hands, Andre Jackson knew that his life would never be the same again. The days following the winter concert passed in a blur for Andre. Students who had never spoken to him before suddenly wanted to sit with him at lunch. Teachers who had previously overlooked him now smiled and greeted him in the hallways. Even Principal Chen had called him to her office to personally congratulate him on his performance. "I've been at this school for 15 years, she told him, "and I've never seen a student accomplish what you did with so little experience." The only person who didn't seem pleased by Andre's success was Mr. Harris. The music teacher had barely spoken to Andre since the concert, instead finding reasons to send him on errands during class or focusing his attention on other students. "He's embarrassed," Dion said as they walked home from school a week after the concert. "You were supposed to fail, and instead you showed everyone how good you are." Andre shrugged. "I don't really care what he thinks anymore." But that wasn't entirely true. Despite everything, a part of Andre still wanted Mr. Harris's approval, still wanted the music teacher to acknowledge what he had accomplished. Dr. Wilson, meanwhile, was steadily recovering his strength. By mid-January, he was well enough to resume their regular lessons, though now Ms. Powell joined them once a week to help with more advanced techniques. "You have a gift," she told Andre, after listening to him play a Bach minuet they'd been working on. "With the right training, you could go far with this." "How far?" Andre asked. Ms. Powell glanced at Dr. Wilson before answering. "There's a summer program at the Riverside School of Music for promising young musicians. It's competitive, but I think you should apply." "A summer program?" Andre's mind raced. "Like a camp?" More like an intensive school, Ms. Powell explained. 6 weeks of daily lessons, music theory, orchestra practice. It's where the serious young musicians go. And it costs serious money, Dr. Wilson added with a frown. Several $1,000s last I checked. Andre's excitement deflated. There was no way his mom could afford that kind of expense. There are scholarships, Ms. Powell said quickly, reading his expression. Full scholarships for exceptional students. The auditions are in March. March? Andre's eyes widened. That's less than 2 months away. It would be a lot of work, Dr. Wilson acknowledged. Even more than preparing for the concert. Andre thought about the long hours of practice, the aching shoulders, the calloused fingers. Could he do it all again, but harder, for something even bigger? I want to try, he said finally. If my mom says it's okay. His mother was hesitant when he brought it up that evening. A summer program? She repeated, stirring a pot of stew on the stove. What about your summer job? You were going to help at the community center, remember? I know, Andre said, but Ms. Powell says this could be a really big opportunity. And there are scholarships. His mother sighed. Andre, honey, even with a scholarship, there would be costs. Transportation, proper clothes, spending money. I could save up, he offered, from my allowance and birthday money. Nana Bea, who had been quietly listening from her chair in the corner, spoke up. Loretta, the boy has found something he's good at. Something that makes him happy. Don't you think that's worth a little sacrifice? His mother looked between them, then shook her head with a small smile. You two ganging up on me now? But her expression softened. All right, you can audition. But no promises about whether you can go if you get in, understand? Andre nodded eagerly. I understand. Thank you, Mom. The next 2 months were even more intense than the preparation for the winter concert had been. In addition to learning new audition pieces, a movement, from a Mozart concerto and a technical etude, Andre now had to study music theory to prepare for the written portion of the audition. Dr. Wilson pushed him harder than ever. Your playing has improved remarkably, he said, but your theory knowledge is still elementary. You need to understand the structure of music, not just play the notes. Andre spent his evenings poring over books about key signatures, chord progressions, and music history. During lunch breaks at school, he would find empty classrooms to practice fingering techniques without his violin, his left hand dancing through silent scales and arpeggios. Mr. Harris noticed, of course. One day in early February, he kept Andre after class. Jackson, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I hear you're preparing for the Riverside Summer Program auditions. Andre nodded cautiously. Yes, sir. Mr. Harris seemed to struggle with something, then sighed. It's a very competitive program. Very prestigious. I know, Andre said. But Ms. Powell thinks I have a chance. Ms. Powell, Mr. Harris repeated. From Westridge High? Yes, she's been helping with my lessons. Mr. Harris was quiet for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly on his desk. The theory exam is particularly challenging. Are you prepared for that? Andre hesitated. Despite all his studying, the theory portion still confused him sometimes. I'm working on it, he said finally. To his surprise, Mr. Harris opened a drawer and pulled out a thin workbook. This is what I used with advanced students in the past, he said, sliding it across the desk. It covers everything that's likely to be on the Riverside exam. Andre stared at the workbook, then at Mr. Harris, unsure what to make of this unexpected help. Thank you, he said. Taking the book carefully, Mr. Harris nodded stiffly. Good luck with the audition, Jackson. As Andre turned to leave, Mr. Harris added, and you played well. At the concert, the words were grudging, but they sent a warm feeling through Andre's chest nonetheless. By March, Andre's playing had reached a level that amazed even Dr. Wilson. His fingers moved with confidence across the fingerboard. His bow control allowed for subtle dynamics, and his intonation was surprisingly accurate for someone who had been playing for less than 6 months. You've done the work, Dr. Wilson told him the day before the audition. Now you need to trust yourself. The Riverside School of Music was housed in an imposing stone building downtown. As Andre and his mother approached the entrance, his knees felt weak. So many kids, he whispered, watching as young musicians with instrument cases streamed through the doors. They all looked so confident. His mother squeezed his shoulder. Just do your best. That's all anyone can ask. Inside, they were directed to a waiting area where dozens of other children and their parents sat nervously. Andre noticed that he was one of only a few black kids in the room. Most of the others were dressed in formal clothes that looked expensive, their instrument cases gleaming with the sheen of quality. Andre glanced down at his own second-hand violin case with its scuffed corners and fraying handle. For the first time, he wondered if he really belonged here. A woman with a clipboard called his name. Andre Jackson, you're in room 3 for the theory exam. Instrument auditions will follow immediately after. He looked at his mother in panic. Both parts right away? I thought there would be time in between. You'll be fine, she assured him, though her own eyes betrayed her nerves. Remember everything Dr. Wilson taught you. The theory exam was as difficult as Mr. Harris had warned. Questions about circle of fifths, harmonic analysis, and compositional forms made Andre's head spin. But the workbook Mr. Harris had given him proved invaluable. Many of the concepts were familiar from his studies. When he finished, he was immediately escorted to another room where 3 stern-faced judges sat behind a table. Mr. Jackson, the middle judge said, consulting her notes. You'll be playing Mozart Concerto No. 3 first movement and the Kreutzer Etude No. 8, correct? Andre nodded, his mouth too dry for words. Whenever you're ready, she said. Andre took a deep breath, positioned his violin, and began to play. The Mozart flowed from his fingers with a lightness that surprised even him. When he reached the cadenza, the difficult solo passage Dr. Wilson had drilled him on for weeks, his mind went blank for a terrifying second before muscle memory took over. The etude was more challenging, with its rapid string crossings and awkward double stops. He made several mistakes, wincing internally each time, but kept going just as Dr. Wilson had taught him. When he finished, the judges made notes without comment. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, the middle judge said. Results will be posted in 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were the longest of Andre's life. He threw himself into his regular schoolwork, trying not to think about the audition or what it would mean if he failed. Dayon, who had become his closest friend, did his best to distract him. Even if you don't get in, he said, you're still the best player in our school. By like a million miles. At home, Andre noticed his mother having hushed conversations with Nana Bia, discussions that would stop abruptly when he entered the room. He suspected they were talking about finances, about how they would manage if he actually got into the program. Finally, the day arrived. Riverside would be posting the results online at noon. Andre sat in the school library during lunch, refreshing the page on a computer while Dion peered over his shoulder. It's up, Dion said suddenly, pointing at the screen where a new link had appeared. With trembling fingers, Andre clicked on Summer Program Acceptances. A long list of names appeared, arranged alphabetically. Andre scrolled slowly, his heart pounding as he passed through the early letters of the alphabet. When he reached the J's, he held his breath, and there it was. Jackson Andre, full scholarship. You did it. Dion shouted, earning a sharp shh from the librarian. Sorry, he whispered, then turned back to Andre with a huge grin. You actually did it. Andre stared at the screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. Full scholarship. He had earned a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious music programs in the state. That afternoon, he raced to Dr. Wilson's house, bursting through the door without even knocking. I got in, he announced breathlessly. Full scholarship. Dr. Wilson, who had been reading in his armchair, looked up with a broad smile. Of course you did, he said, as if there had never been any doubt. I told you that you have a gift. Later that evening, Andre sat at the kitchen table with his mother and Nana B, still floating on a cloud of excitement. I have something to tell you, his mother said, her expression serious. About the summer program, Andre's smile faltered. What is it? Is there still a problem with money? No, baby, that's not it. She exchanged a glance with Nana B.A. I've been talking with my supervisor at the hospital. They're offering me a better position, more money, better hours. But it would mean moving closer to downtown. Moving, Andre repeated. But what about my school? What about Dr. Wilson and my lessons? You'd be closer to Riverside, his mother pointed out. And Dr. Wilson says he can still teach you once a week. The rest of the time you'd be working with teachers at the music school. Andre tried to process this information. Moving meant leaving Pinewood Middle School, leaving Mr. Harris's class, maybe even seeing less of Dion. But it also meant being closer to the music school, closer to the future that suddenly seemed possible. There's something else, his mother added. The letter from Riverside mentioned that students who excel in the summer program are sometimes offered scholarships to their academic year program as well. Andre's eyes widened. Their regular school? For the whole year? His mother nodded. It's a private school, very expensive. But with a scholarship? She trailed off, letting him fill in the blanks. Andre sat back, feeling as if the entire world had shifted on its axis. 6 months ago, he had been just another overlooked kid, the quiet boy who didn't fit in. Now he was a musician with a future full of possibilities, all because someone had tried to set him up to fail. So, his mother said, watching his face carefully, what do you think? Andre thought about everything that had happened since that day in October, when Mr. Harris had handed him a violin with a smirk. He thought about Dr. Wilson's patience, about Ms. Powell's encouragement, about Dion's friendship, and he thought about the feeling he got when he played, that sense of connection to something larger than himself, something beautiful and meaningful. I think, he said slowly, that I want to see where this goes. His mother smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Then that's what we'll do. 5 years had passed since Andre first picked up a violin at Pinewood Middle School. Now 17, he sat in the green room of the city symphony hall, trying to calm his racing heart. Through the door, he could hear the murmur of the audience filling the auditorium. Over 1,000 people waiting for the annual Young Artists Showcase to begin. Nervous? Asked Tiana, his friend from Riverside who would be performing a Chopin piano concerto later in the program. Andre nodded, running his fingers over the polished wood of his violin case. It wasn't the school-issued instrument anymore. This was a fine Italian violin on loan from Riverside's collection, worth more than his mother's car. Just think about how far you've come, Tiana said, squeezing his shoulder. You've got this. Far indeed, Andre thought as he opened the case and lifted out his violin. From a boy who could barely make a sound to someone about to perform with professional musicians, sometimes it still felt like a dream. Life at Riverside had been challenging but rewarding. The academic classes were rigorous, the music training even more so. Andre had spent countless hours in practice rooms, working through difficult passages until his fingers ached and his shoulders burned. There had been moments of frustration, even tears, but always Dr. Wilson's voice in his head. Quality over quantity. Focus on making each note speak. Dr. Wilson still gave him lessons once a month, though the elderly musician had officially retired from teaching 2 years ago. You're my last student, he'd told Andre. Make sure I go out on a high note. Mr. Chen had become Andre's primary teacher at Riverside, pushing him relentlessly toward excellence. Good is not enough, the stern director would say. We aim for extraordinary. And somehow, through all the hard work, Andre had achieved just that. Last spring, he'd won the school's concerto competition, earning him tonight's opportunity to perform with the City Symphony. The piece he'd chosen was Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, a monumental work that had once seemed impossibly difficult, but now felt like an old friend. A stagehand poked his head into the green room. Jackson, you're on in 5 minutes. Andre stood, smoothing down his concert suit, a gift from Dr. Wilson for his 16th birthday. He'd grown tall in the past few years, his once skinny frame filling out with the confidence of someone who knew his place in the world. As he walked toward the stage, he caught sight of a familiar face in the wings, Mr. Harris, his old middle school music teacher, talking with one of the orchestra staff. The two had maintained an unlikely connection over the years. Mr. Harris had retired from Pinewood the previous year, but still attended Andre's major performances. Good luck out there, Mr. Harris said, extending his hand. Though I doubt you'll need it. Andre shook it firmly. Thanks for coming. Wouldn't miss it, Mr. Harris replied. Then, more quietly, your grandfather would be proud. It was still strange to hear Mr. Harris speak with such warmth. Their relationship had evolved slowly over the years, the initial resentment giving way to a cautious respect and eventually to something almost like friendship. Andre had even performed at Mr. Harris's retirement ceremony, a gesture that had brought tears to the old teacher's eyes. The concertmaster appeared, signaling it was time. Andre took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding, the audience a dark mass beyond the edge of the stage. Andre found his mark and bowed as applause filled the hall. His mother and Nana B would be in the front row alongside Dr. Wilson in his wheelchair. Dion, who had continued with viola and now played in the City Youth Orchestra, had promised to bring his whole family. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra began the dramatic introduction to the Tchaikovsky concerto. Andrei waited, counting the measures until his entrance, letting the music wash over him. Then it was time. He raised his violin, placed the bow on the strings, and began to play. The first note soared over the orchestra, clear and confident. As the music unfolded, Andrei felt himself being carried away by it, his fingers finding the notes with a certainty that came from years of practice. The difficult runs and double stops that had once seemed impossible now flowed naturally from his hands. In the cadenza, the extended solo, passage where the orchestra falls silent, Andrei felt as if he were telling his own story through Tchaikovsky's notes. The struggle, the doubt, the persistence, and finally the triumph. When the orchestra rejoined him for the final section, it was like being lifted on a wave of sound. The last chord rang out, and there was a moment of silence before the audience erupted in applause. Andrei lowered his violin, breathless and exhilarated. As he bowed, the applause grew louder, and people began to stand. A standing ovation, his first. Afterward, the green room filled with well-wishers. His mother hugged him tightly, her eyes shining with tears. "Baby, that was beautiful," she whispered. "Just beautiful." Dr. Wilson sat in his wheelchair, his once robust frame now frail but his eyes as sharp as ever. "Technically excellent," he said with a nod. "But more importantly, you played with heart. That's what separates the merely good from the truly great." Mr. Chen approached with a tall, distinguished-looking man. "Andrei, this is Dean Powell from the National Conservatory. He'd like to speak with you." Dean Powell shook Andrei's hand warmly. "Remarkable performance, young man. I understand you'll be graduating from Riverside next year. Have you given any thought to your next steps?" Andrei glanced at his mother. They had discussed college options, but the top music schools seemed financially out of reach. "Even with scholarships, I'm exploring my options," he said carefully. "Well, the National Conservatory would very much like to be among those options," Dean Powell said. "We have a full scholarship program for exceptional talents, and based on what I heard tonight, you would be an ideal candidate." Andrei's mouth went dry. The National Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. That would be amazing." Dean Powell handed him a business card. "Have your teachers send me your portfolio. We should talk further." As the crowd thinned, Andrei found a quiet corner with his mother and Nana B. "The National Conservatory," his mother said, shaking her head in wonder. "When I think about where this all started." "With a mean trick that backfired," Nana B finished, her aged face crinkling in a smile. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." Later that night, after the post-concert reception, Andrei walked with Dr. Wilson to the parking lot where the elderly musician's nurse waited with a car. "I have something for you," Dr. Wilson said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. "It belonged to your grandfather." Andrei accepted the pouch curiously. Inside was a delicate wooden mute, a small device that fits on a violin's bridge to soften its sound. "Joe carried it with him always," Dr. Wilson explained. Said it reminded him that sometimes the softest notes speak the loudest. Andrei ran his fingers over the smooth wood, worn from years of use. "I never knew him," he said quietly. "But sometimes when I play, I feel like he's listening." Dr. Wilson nodded. "Music connects us across time. When you play Bach, you're in conversation with a man who died 300 years ago. When you play your grandfather's violin, you're carrying on his legacy." The summer after high school graduation was a whirlwind of preparation. Andrei had been accepted to the National Conservatory with a full scholarship, and suddenly there were forms to fill out, housing arrangements to make, and most importantly, hours of practice to prepare for the rigorous program ahead. 2 weeks before he was set to leave, Dion organized a surprise farewell party at the community center. All the important people from Andrei's journey were there. His mother and Nana B, of course. Dr. Wilson with his nurse, Ms. Powell, who had continued teaching Dion all these years, Mr. Chen and several teachers from Riverside, and to Andrei's surprise, Mr. Harris. "You didn't think I'd miss sending off my most successful student, did you?" the retired music teacher said with a wry smile. I'm still not sure I deserve that title, Andre replied. Mr. Harris's expression turned serious. You earned it. Despite my best efforts to the contrary. He cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, Andre. A proper one after all these years. Andre shook his head. You've shown your support in 100 ways since then. That's what matters. Still, Mr. Harris insisted, I want you to know that watching your journey has been the greatest privilege of my teaching career. You taught me more than I ever taught you. The party was filled with music, of course. Dayon played a viola piece he had composed specially for the occasion. Tiana performed a jazzy piano arrangement of Andre's favorite pop song. And finally, everyone insisted that Andre play. He chose a simple folk melody that Dr. Wilson had taught him years ago. Nothing flashy or technically difficult. Just a tune that spoke of home and friendship and the bittersweet pain of saying goodbye. As he played, Andre looked around at the faces of those who had supported him on his journey. His mother, who had worked extra shifts to buy his first sheet music, Nana Bia, who had never doubted his ability, Dr. Wilson, who had seen his potential from the beginning, Dayon, who had stood by him through every challenge, and even Mr. Harris, whose misguided attempt to humiliate him had instead set him on the path to finding his gift. The day Andre left for the conservatory was bright and clear. His mother and Nana B drove him to the bus station, his few belongings packed in 2 suitcases, his violin case clutched tightly in his hand. Call us as soon as you get settled, his mother said, hugging him fiercely. And remember, no matter what happens there, we are so proud of you. I will, Andre promised. And I'll be home for Thanksgiving. Nana B pressed something into his hand, a small photograph in a simple frame. It showed a young black man holding a violin standing in front of a church. Your grandfather, she said, taken the year before he met your grandmother. Andre studied the photo, noting the proud set of the man's shoulders, the confident way he held his instrument. There was something familiar in his eyes, in the tilt of his chin. Thank you, Andre whispered, carefully wrapping the frame in his sweater before placing it in his backpack. As the bus pulled away, Andre watched his mother and Nana B growing smaller in the distance. He felt a mixture of excitement and fear, the same emotions he had experienced that first day at Riverside, but stronger now. He was heading into the unknown, toward a future he once could never have imagined. The bus rounded a corner and his family disappeared from view. Andre opened his violin case, not to play, there wasn't room on the crowded bus, but just to touch the strings, to feel the connection to everything that had brought him to this moment, from a cruel joke intended to make him fail to a full scholarship at one of the nation's top music schools, from a boy who had never held a violin to a young man with a future bright with promise. Life, Andre reflected as the city gave way to open countryside, was a lot like music. It had its dissonant chords and unexpected key changes, its crescendos and diminuendos, but in the hands of someone who refused to give up, even the most challenging passages could become something beautiful. He closed the violin case and leaned back in his seat, watching the world rush by outside the window. The next chapter of his story was about to begin,